Don't fall in love with your own idea. Listen to the customers, listen to the market.
I always say that the founder, the CEO, should be the number one salesman of any business.
To me, a CEO's job is three things: vision, culture, and cash.
Pipeline is such an important, because it's the closest thing to forecasting for the future.
The biggest lesson is always be true to your vision and values. I think a human who's using AI will replace a human who's not using AI.
Welcome to the podcast From Cold to Close. My name is Saeed and I'm the founder here at SRC Growth Partner, a company that works with professional services firms from around the world to help them increase their revenue and profitability by acquiring new clients. My guest today is Bill Roth, President and CEO of Roth IAMS and co-founder of Slam Technologies. He's a visionary leader at the forefront of integrated asset management. Through 3 decades of collaborating with public and private sector clients across North America and millions of square feet of facilities assessed, Bill's expertise gives him unique insight into the field of facility and infrastructure asset management. Bill's experience working with a variety of clients led him to understand the importance of having consistent and defensible data and the critical role it plays in telling his clients' asset management story. A successful entrepreneur, Bill founded Roth IAMS in 2014 and leads its ongoing growth and success. In 2018, he co-founded Slam Technologies to support both Roth IAMS and its end-user clients in leveraging facility data through technology. Committed to solving the world's deferred, renewal, and capital maintenance backlog crisis, he made it the vision for Roth IAMS. Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Said. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to it. The best place I like to start every single podcast is primarily really understanding your journey to where you are today. I feel like that's always a great starting point, especially for our viewers and listeners who don't necessarily know who Bill Roth is. So, Bill, can you share a little bit more about your journey as an entrepreneur and how you founded Roth IAMS?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's funny because I've always had sort of an entrepreneurial bent, and I was sort of an intrapreneur for a number of years earlier in my career. And so I actually have an environmental background. I went to school for hydrogeology, which has nothing to do with what we do now. And so in the early part of my career, I was primarily focused on environmental issues inside a large growing engineering company. And about 26 years ago, started to get involved in work around facility asset management, facility assessment, and working with the built environment instead of the natural environment. And that really sort of grabbed hold of me, primarily because, again, from that entrepreneurial thinking, if you have an environmental issue on a property and you solve that issue, I'm done. You don't need me anymore on that property. Whereas if you have a buildings are there for 50 to 100 years. They continue to age, issues come up, there's different problems. So I transitioned from the environmental more to the facility side of the business because I just felt that if I were able to secure a customer, I could keep them for the long term as opposed to, hey, thanks for cleaning up my problem. I'll call you if I have another one sort of thing. So my career really sort of morphed into the facility side of the business, and I operated and grew a team inside a company that then got acquired by an even larger company. But what I found was that the market needed something different than what the traditional architectural and engineering firms were looking for. Tried to build that tried to do the intrapreneur thing again and do that within the larger organization, but it just didn't really align with where they wanted to go. No criticism of where they wanted to go. It just, we wanted to go this way, they wanted to go that way. So basically kind of agreed to a split. And at that point, I had to decide, do I go find another company to work for and start over? And at that point, I had been with that other company through the acquisition almost 20 years. So do I want to go find somebody else to work for and start over with like zero credibility, zero tenure, any of those sorts of things? So I talked to a few folks and none of them really got the vision of what I thought the market needed. And so it really came down to two things. One was a risk management decision. Do I really want to go work for somebody else, spend a bunch of time trying to achieve a vision that they may or may not buy into? And two, to be honest, since I was a little kid, I've always had an entrepreneurial bent. I started my first company at 12 selling fishing tackle out of a hardware store close to home. And so I've always really wanted to be my own boss or start my own company. So it really was those two things coming together at what was, the right time for me personally.
Sure. I think that's really interesting to hear. And I think the point that really interests me was when you mentioned the background you had, where it was you went from environmental, then you went into looking at the building side of things. And I think it's often a very intelligent move when you're looking at a business model, you're looking at a way to be able to run a business in a sophisticated way. You need a lifetime value to be a huge aspect to any kind of business. And if it's a one-time transaction, one-time project, and things aren't returning, it can be quite an uphill battle to get the runway that you're looking for. So I think that it's really interesting to hear that you pivoted very early in your journey to be able to go down a certain direction, and then you've arrived at where you are today. Tell us more about Roth IAMS.
Sure.
What exactly is asset management? I'm sure that it's a term that people hear all the time, but what exactly is it? And explain to us a little bit more about it.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and asset management is a term like sustainability, right? It's this term that means many different things to many different people. So really our area of focus around asset management is facility and infrastructure asset management. So we work with primarily public sector institutions, so universities, colleges, federal, provincial, state, local governments, healthcare, those sorts of institutions that have large portfolios of buildings, typically older buildings, typically underfunded buildings. And so what we do is our main focus is on helping you figure out what data do you need to achieve your business objectives. If you don't know what your business objectives are for your facilities, we'll help you with that as well. Once you've got that figured out, then what data do I need to answer those critical questions, to develop those critical plans? Go get that consistent and defensible data. And what we mean by that is consistent means when we look at 100 buildings, we're applying a similar lens through which we're doing that data collection. And defensible means you can trust it. So I can stand up, if I'm a board member, I can stand up in front of my board peers and basically say, look, I trust this data. It's good data. Because that data is then used to make better decisions and, in a perfect world, get more money to fund the renewal and the maintenance and the capital renewal of the facilities.
Makes a lot of sense, and I think that fills in the pieces there of anyone that wants to know a little bit more about what you're doing. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your philosophy and what shaped your business decisions over the years. Talk to me more about, and we've spoken previously about how you shouldn't ever fall in love with your idea. Talk to us more about that.
Sure. Well, when I first started the business, I had worked in a really large publicly traded company. I've always been more on the client-facing side of everything that we've ever done. And in my previous life, just due to the nature of the role I was in and the organization and the size of it, I had a little bit of PTSD from talking to customers, because the only time I got involved with customers is if there was a problem, right? Like if there was a problem project, I would get the work, I would sort of set the vision. And then if there was an issue, somebody would call me and go, hey, Bill, I need your help. And so I was sort of not the only touch points that I was having with our existing customers was when there were issues. And so when I started the company, I wanted to take a little bit of a break from the work that I can't do. Because again, my background being environmental, most of what we do, I'm not qualified to actually do the work. So we sort of started focusing more on the management consulting side of things. So what do you do before you go out and get the data? What do you do after you get the data? That was sort of the vision and the plan for Roth IAMS. And I quickly realized if you work for somebody here and you work for somebody here, but there's a gap in the middle, you're letting that client go work for a competitor who may also do the upstream and the downstream. So after a little while, when I'm like, okay, I'm good, I've kind of gotten over the hangover of my previous job, for lack of a better term, then we basically reimagined everything, and we started to fill in that gap because it's what our customers wanted. And so I think, again, that advice that you mentioned earlier, don't fall in love with your own idea. Listen to the customers, listen to the market. And that's always been my philosophy, even before I started the company, was it doesn't matter how great you think your idea is. If the customer doesn't see value in it, it doesn't make sense. So you either have to reshape the way you're presenting it to the customer so they do see value in it, or change it because your idea wasn't right in the first place. And so constantly keeping your ear to the ground, listening to the market, being present for other entrepreneurs and CEOs. You got to listen to the market. And honestly, don't start a business if you don't want to sell. I know a lot of people, who have really good ideas or really strong technical people or whatever else the case is, but if you can't make a sale, there's no business. And so whenever somebody's like, hey, should I start a business? Like, listen, one, don't fall in love with your idea. And two, you better be ready to sell, or you better be able to afford to pay somebody to sell for you in the early days. And most entrepreneurs it's usually you're starting from scratch, you're bootstrapping, so you're not going to go pay some high price salesperson. So you really got to sell it yourself.
I couldn't agree more with your sentiment there. And I always say the founder, the CEO should be the number one salesman of any business. You are the reason that your product is around, right? And so if you cannot sell the product itself or the service, how can you expect anyone else to, right? Unless it's a completely productized product or service and it's been done millions of times before and you hire a top salesperson, which most people, if you're bootstrapping, doesn't have that. So talk to me about your approach to sales then. Because a lot of people will be hearing this and probably thinking, well, sales is hard, right? Closing deals is hard. Trying to demonstrate value, trying to get someone on board and bought into what you're trying to sell them and get them to actually pay you a large sum of money at times, if it's management consulting, if it's anything really. What's your approach? How do you do it? What's the advice you would give?
So first of all, it's all about relationships, right? Like, regardless of the fact that again, you hear these stats like 90% of the sale is done before you ever actually talk to somebody because they're surfing the website, they're reading reviews, all those sorts of things. I really believe that you've got to build relationships with people, because if people make the buying decisions, and you can't treat everybody the same. Like, you can't say, hey, look, you're an AVP of a large university. You care about the same things as the AVP of that other large university we used to work for. Does. No, that's not true. Yes, they're in the same business, for lack of a better term, but they're unique. They have their own drivers, their own organizations. So we take really a consultative approach and a thought leadership approach to our sales and marketing. And so we try to put out a lot of valuable content to folks so that so that when we walk into a room or we're at a conference and they see our logo, or they see me standing at a booth, or they see one of our people standing at a booth, they recognize us and go, wow, thank you for that, that white paper on this or that webinar on that. And so you can't, there's so much noise out there that from our perspective, it's about building relationships and leading with thought leadership, giving before you're asking for in return. That's, again, if I give you ideas, if I give you concepts, if I give you, knowledge, not everybody, but hopefully when you have a need for what we do, you'll come back to us, because what we do is not like, we go to tons of conferences, we do tons of meetings. Rarely do we walk out like that. Like, rarely do we catch somebody on the day they need the product or service that we're selling. And so you've got to be memorable. You got to be top of mind when they need you. And so that thought leadership, putting information out there. And from a personal perspective, you really got to believe in what you're selling, because for me, if somebody says no, okay, there's nothing wrong with what we're offering. It's they're not the right customer. And not every customer is the right customer for your business.
Couldn't agree more with what you've just said there, Bill. We always say to all of our clients, there's two things that you need to really solve for when you're doing sales. It's trust and relationships, right? You nail those two, you've increased your chances of actually closing a deal and actually having a sale by tenfold, because those are the biggest stumbling blocks to any kind of decision. You need to be able to trust the person on the other side that says that they can do what they say on the tin. And the relationship often, because things can go wrong, the relationship often is one of the strongest points in which you can go, okay, well, when things are going wrong, you can still trust that person and you can talk to them through the problems. So I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that. In terms of then your approach to, and you've touched on it a few times now, you said it yourself, you're not the most technical in what you're doing. You set the vision, you bring in the business. As a technical professional services firm, how have you balanced bringing in technical expertise with the critical need for that sales capability, right? Do you have other people bringing that sales in, or are you primarily hiring for the technical so that you can focus on that sales capability?
Yeah, so we're about 11 years old now. And so for probably the first 8 or 9 years of the company, it was mostly me bringing in new sales. And then a lot of the folks that have come to work for me, we've worked together for a long time. And so my team, not everybody, but a core part of my team that we have now was part of my core team before. So we collectively had relationships as a team. And so most of the farming is done by other people within the organization. Most of the hunting up until recently has been done by me, to be honest. In the last few years, we've brought in some sales, like a true sales force, but I still play a large role, primarily in the US. We started out in Canada. 2 years ago, I moved to the US. And a big part of my role right now today is that sales and growth in the US market, because as a newer company or a smaller player in the market, large institutional customers like to know they've got the CEO's phone number, right? That's part of the trust. You went back to building trust, right? Well, the trust is I can get the guy who can make the final decision on the phone if I need him. So we're kind of past that in Canada just because we've been around for a little bit longer. So we have a much stronger client management network there and a much stronger relationship based selling with existing customers.
Yeah, I think I want to touch on that. And you mentioned there, you've been in Canada for a number of years now. You've got that reputation. People know who you are, but you have expanded to the US, right? And the US market represents a significant, I guess, growth phase for your company.
Absolutely.
What were the key challenges you faced during that transition? Because international expansion in any shape or form it's tough, right? So what are the challenges that you experienced in that transition?
So, as an entrepreneur, I think you have to be very much a positive person, right? You have to be I'm not even a glass half full person. I'm like the glass is overflowing kind of person. Because I don't think you do this if you're not. And again, now we're 4.5 years into our US expansion. And as with everything, it's going to take longer, it's going to be more expensive, and it's going to be harder than you thought. One of the things I was surprised about kind of in a good way is that the markets are very similar. So customer needs are very similar, customer profiles are very similar. One of the interesting things was that there are some very sophisticated customers related to what we do in the United States, absolutely hands down. But there's also a lot more customers that are a few years behind where a lot of organizations were in Canada. So when we started out in some sectors, we had to educate before trying to sell, because it was like, again, for the most part in Canada, you don't have to sell people on what we do. They know they have to do it. It's a matter of, hey, are you the right fit for us? And that sort of thing. A lot of organizations that we've come across, they've never really engaged in a detailed asset management plan. It's just been sort of ad hoc and not data driven and things like that. Like they're doing it, but they're not doing it in maybe as organized or consolidated a way. And so for the first couple of years, and even still, we've had to educate a lot of folks, which lengthens the sales cycle, right? First, I have to convince you should do this. Then I have to convince you that we're the right partner when you go ahead and do that. So that was a bit of a big surprise. Staffing, hiring and recruitment in the United States is very different than where we are in Canada, partially because we have a much stronger reputation in Canada. So if you do what we do, people know who we are, whereas down there, we're still building that reputation. So we're not having really many people come, hey, we want to work for you. Whereas in Canada, we still get a lot of that. So it's just a little bit more difficult.
I can imagine that would be quite a tough experience there, because hiring and staff is probably one of the most important things you can do when you're running any kind of business, especially when you're someone that's bringing the business in. You need people to be able to actually deliver what you're selling. I can imagine that being a real challenge, especially with the reputation you have in Canada and transitioning over. What advice would you give to, I guess, other entrepreneurs looking to expand their businesses internationally? Maybe someone from Canada, maybe someone from a different nation, and maybe they're looking to go into the US market or anything. What advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, it's the old analogy, right? Don't dive into the dark pond head first, right?
Yeah.
So we were originally supposed to expand to the US in 2020, but COVID happened and that put us off a year. But starting probably middle way through 2018, we started to do some market research, started to kind of poke around a few areas, so that like when we actually started, we weren't actually at the starting line. We had already done a lot of market research. We had reached out to some customers. We had done some competitive analysis. So do your homework, I guess, is probably one of the first things that I would say. Is there's so much information out there. Find out where your potential customers are. Find out who is like the people that you're working with in your home country. In those countries, find the associations where those people are, and start to put feelers out so you understand it, so you're not starting cold. So you could say we started expanding in the US in the middle of 2018, but we didn't incorporate until 2021 because we were really just doing homework and we had no intention of. So now if we tripped over somebody and they were going to throw a bunch of money out of us, we would have started earlier, obviously, but our focus was really more on understanding and data gathering and research. And then when you go in, again, make sure you've got more time and more money than you expect it's going to take. I will say, coming from Canada to the United States, and I knew it, but funding growth in the United States when you're losing 40 points on your dollar is just makes it that much more expensive. And so we knew that, but it's still an additional challenge. So depending on what market you're going to, you got to understand the currency difference and fluctuation, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and that in itself, that losing 40 points on the dollar, that's a huge hit that you wouldn't otherwise expect. You go in and then you're like, okay, well, that is a tough situation to deal with. Necessity. My father used to give me a saying. He used to say, necessity has no bounds, right? Like there is no limits. If it's necessary, it has to be done. When you fall into something and you feel like you have to do it, it is necessary. So I think it's really interesting. And I think in terms of then, you spoke about data and problem solving and defensible data, things like that. There's a really topical 2-letter word that's been going around the internet recently for many years now, and that's AI, right? Yeah. Talk to us a bit more about AI and how maybe you're implementing it in your own business, and also how you see it actually changing the industry, or maybe not.
Yeah. Well, I think that AI is going to change everything we do, like from personal lives to professional lives. And we're investing very heavily in using AI to increase productivity in what we do, from both the data acquisition side and the data management side and the decision support and all of that. So I think that the one thing I will say is most of our customers are facilities folks, right? They're the people involved with managing the buildings that we work in, we learn in, we heal in, we live in. And that group tends to be technologically slow to adopt things. And so not for any, I don't know, to be honest, I don't really know why. I mean, bricks and mortar is pretty old school, and that's what most people will kind of live in. So I think it'll take a little bit longer to impact our customer sectors than some others, like manufacturing and other things like that. I think will always lead the forefront for that. But, I think it's going to dramatically change the methodologies that we use. It's going to dramatically change the way we deliver information. But I think, I'm more of I don't necessarily buy into AI is going to replace humans. I think a human who's using AI will replace a human who's not using AI. That's sort of more my philosophy. I see it as an enhancer, not necessarily as a replacement, particularly for what we do. Yes, there's some things that will just get automated and will disappear, but I think for what we do, it's really more about how do we use this as another tool in our tool belt to take us to another level.
Yeah, I think it's spot on to what I'm seeing as well, in the sense that you need someone to still be able to be behind the driver's wheel, right? AI can do 90% of the work for you if it has to. Like, it can gather the data, it can spit out what it needs to spit out, it can put it into a condensed report, whatever it needs to, but you still need someone to read it and go, okay, well, no, that doesn't look right, that doesn't, okay, let's adjust this needs to go to a client, I need to make sure, and actually have someone there to be able to handle it. And I think we're living in an age where you have job titles of like ChatGPT prompt engineers, right? And having people to actually do that, because by doing that, it makes you more efficient, right? And we all know time is the most valuable asset in any sense, and being able to buy back your time at a much lower cost than what you previously would have had to do massively helps. Bill, this segment of the podcast we like to call the Entrepreneur's Room, right? Yep. And it's a series of questions we like to ask all of our guests to give our viewers and listeners an opportunity to understand how business owners and business leaders think when operating their business. So the first question I'd like to ask at this stage of the podcast is, how are you currently spending your days as a leader of the business?
So to me, a CEO's job is three things: vision, culture, and cash. So that's sort of the lens through which I try to organize my day. Realistically, right now, as I mentioned before, I'm spending a lot of time growing the business in the US, which is sort of more on the vision/cash side. The other big part of where I'm putting a lot of my time and effort is around our AI implementation and research. It's an area I'm super interested in, and I kind of have, tying it into the vision of where the company goes and how we do things. I think if I'm not involved, it's just we're doomed. And so, to be honest, those are probably the two areas right now where I'm spending the majority of my time. And then obviously on the culture side of things, I'm more of a conductor than a musician in that regard. In the other two areas, I'm also playing the instruments at the same time, but I have an amazing team. So the day-to-day culture, while I'm there kind of conducting, I feel that the implementation of that is happening through my senior leadership team all the way through the organization. So right now, spending a little bit less time on those three, but that's where my team really.
Yeah, I always love listening to the answers to that, because you hear where entrepreneurs and leaders are in their business and what stage there is. I spoke to a former CEO at one point, and she was telling me how she's now gone from CEO to strategic advisor, right? So pure vision play, right? So she's not looking at everything. She's just going, oh, this is what I love to do, and I can just focus on that. Not worried about culture, not worried about cash. I'm just like, and I think that's really interesting because she was far later in her entrepreneurial journey, that maybe 40 years in. It's always interesting to see where people are in that journey. What are the most important metrics to you when looking at the business and operating the business?
Sure. So there's two. And again, because I'm sort of in that visionary and integrator role, like to use an EOS term, there's the today, right? And so today, what's most important to my business is client retention. It's utilization of staff, because again, we're like on the Roth IAMS side, we're dollars for hours, right? So our staff need to be utilized. And then it's the cash side of it is days outstanding for accounts receivable. And so those are sort of my three key things. Are our clients happy, which is harder to measure, right? I still don't think there's a perfect metric for it. It's more of a feeling. Then there's some hard metrics around utilization and AR days outstanding. For the future, it's all about our backlog. How much work do we have contracted? How much work do we have as factored soft backlog that's proposal stage or later? And then what's our pipeline for future sales? Because that's really what's going to allow us to grow and achieve a lot of those goals. Is how much work do we feel we're going to have?
I think a lot of people, I love this question because a lot of people don't give me specific answers that tell me exactly how they're looking at the business. And I don't always get the response of pipeline, right? But I think pipeline is such an important, because it's the closest thing to forecasting for the future, right? And it's as you mentioned, cash is oxygen for a business owner, and being able to actually forecast for, okay, when is this going to close? When will this come through? And gives you an opportunity to actually think strategically and think, okay, what can I do now, and how do I move forward? So I think, yeah.
It's easy to look back with metrics. There's no end of metrics that look in the rearview mirror. Getting the right metrics for your organization that give you a forecast of the future and give you guidance on, like looking through the front windshield instead of the rearview mirror. That's easy. Looking back. Looking forward, you got to find the right metrics. And every business is a little bit different, but you got to figure out what it is for you.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. How are you currently then growing the business? What kind of business development activities are you currently doing? I know you mentioned there you're networking, you're on the boots on the ground, you got your ear to the market, and you do thought leadership and things like that. What other activities are you doing in terms of business development?
Sure. So corporately, we do webinars every 2 weeks, right? As part of our thought leadership. We attend a lot of conferences, right? Again, virtual, blah, blah, blah. Now, you know what? Shaking somebody's hand at a conference, we do, like, for a company our size, we attend pretty close to 30 conferences a year. So getting out there, getting in front of people, you get to listen. Again, like when we go to a conference, we don't just stay in the booth. We go to the sessions, we listen, we hear what the information is coming out, we hear what their concerns are. We try to present at conferences as much as we can. Some people are like, well, if I'm not at the front of the room, I'm not going. We prefer to be at the front of the room, but we still go because we can gather a lot of valuable information just by being there and listening to folks. We have a very, very strong marketing team that takes a lot of the content that I and other people on our team create, putting that out through blogs, through white papers, through regular email communications. And then the easy part of a conference is to go to the conference. Where the success really comes in is the follow-up. Right? Going and standing in a booth and shaking people's hands and, hey, rah, rah, rah. Everybody loves you at a conference, but making sure that you have a plan before the conference so that people go, hey, like we do videos for most of our conferences. People come up to me all the time and go, hey, I saw your video, right? Perfect. There's a connection. Start to build that relationship, start to build that trust, back to what you said before, Saeed. And then once you leave, having a standard methodology to continue that conversation. Because again, I think once in my entire career did I leave a trade show with a contract. It's always, it's a month from now, it's 6 months from now, it's a year from now, and nobody's going to remember you just meeting you once at a conference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The deals are always in the follow-up, right? And nothing rings truer, especially when you look at things in the lens of a sale, in a sales way. Primarily because people need to be problem aware before they can be solution aware, before they can even make a decision, right? Going back to your original point. And so you just being there at the right time, at the right moment. It's a hard thing to just be able to do that. You're more likely to be able to build that relationship over a long enough period of time and then get them thinking about it, get them thinking about that problem, be top of mind, as you said, and then from there you're able to actually get them on the back end. So that's interesting to hear. So where does most of your business actually come from? Is it primarily conferences in the follow-up, or is there a particular channel? Is there where do you see it?
Sure. So there's three main channels for us. Well, I guess there's four. So the first one is public RFPs. A lot of the work that we do comes from public RFPs, and we've got a very methodical approach to doing proposals. We probably write 250 proposals a year, which again is a lot for a company our size. But we have a methodology, we have a procedure, we have a whole team that's just focused on that. So that's one part of it, because even some customers that we develop relationships with, because of their procurement requirements, they have to go RFP. So we have to do that. We have the ability to cross-sell and upsell existing customers, right, as best we can, and which would be method number two. Method number three for us is we have cooperative procurement contracts. So we have a number of contracts where an organization that is basically mandated to go out and procure products and services does so, and then it's basically piggybacking. Other customers are able to piggyback on top of those contracts. So we're able to actually get sole source contracts from government agencies because this other group that they're a member of or that they're a part of has already met the procurement requirements. So that's a growing part of the way that we secure our business. And then there's obviously inbound. So because of our marketing, because of our activities, we get people coming in as well. And then conferences can deliver any one of those three, right? We get inbound from conferences, we get people that are leveraging our cooperative procurements from conferences, and we also have folks that issue RFPs based on, the conferences and other things that we do. So those are sort of the mechanisms, and, it's driven by relationships and market awareness.
I always love hearing, I think what strikes me most about you, Bill, is you know exactly what is going on in the business, right? And you'd be surprised. Some business owners aren't always. They're hoping business will come in just through inbound. But you're going, well, I know this. We do 30 conferences a year. We do white papers. We do this. We do that. Thought leadership. You know exactly what's happening, and that's always really interesting to me, because someone who is involved in the nitty-gritty gives you the best possible chance of success, right? A leader that is involved in that gives you the best possible chance. Although obviously the end goal is obviously to get yourself out of that day-to-day, but knowing the day-to-day is key. So you've mentioned that you've been running Roth IAMS for 11 years now. I'm sure you've had many lessons that you've learned over the years. What's the biggest lesson you could share with us, the viewers and listeners today?
That's a great question. I think that, always be true. I guess the biggest lesson is always be true to your vision and values. There's always going to be a bright, shiny object just off to the side that, low-hanging fruit, easy money, easy win, something like that. And as an example from our side, so as I said, I'm an environmental guy, right? That's my background. I have an environmental consulting background. When we first started, I had people being like, hey, come do this environmental work for me, because I used to do it in my previous life. Come do this environmental work. Well, when you look at our vision to solve the world's deferred capital renewal and maintenance backlog crisis, doing environmental work doesn't meet that goal. Could it have put some cash in our pockets, more cash in our pockets in those early days, which are always the hardest days? Absolutely it could. And I was really, really tempted on a few times, and it was really, really hard for me. Now, in that case, I didn't bite when the worm was dangling in front of my very hungry mouth. But I think that there are other instances where we work for a customer that maybe wasn't exactly right for, you know what I mean? They weren't necessarily our perfect fit for a customer. We knew that they didn't value the consistent and defensible data. They just wanted somebody to check a box. But we did it because it was a big project, or it was a big customer, or it was the right customer. And honestly, those have been our most problematic projects. And I obviously, for confidentiality reasons, I can't name names, But I think, like I said, from a broad perspective, the lens through which you make all your decisions should be your vision and your core values, and avoid the distraction of bright, shiny things that are just outside of it. Things that are way outside of it are easy, right? But it's the thing that's just on the other side of that line that's really, really tempting.
Fantastic advice. And I think strikes me that it's like short-term vision versus long-term vision, right? And short-term decisions and going just outside of that line, it's easy to it fixes the short term, right? But your long term becomes more difficult because the people that are running the projects, it becomes more complicated. It kills bandwidth. You might have less bandwidth where a good project comes along, and then you're like, oh, I wish I didn't take this because this one we would have been much happier with, and this would have helped us much more, and then it becomes much more difficult. So I think that's great advice to really.
Well, and one of the other challenges is once you move the line,
yes,
it's there, and then you move the line and you move the line and you move the line, and you can end up with drift, and all of a sudden realize a couple years down the road, oh my gosh,
yeah,
we're completely not focused on where we should be or where we want to be, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I like to end every single podcast with the same question, and it's, if you had a magic wand you could wave to solve one business problem, what would that be?
That's easy for me. So what we do is pretty niche, right? And nobody goes to school to do what we do, right? Most people who end up working in our business went to school to do either design, construction, or actual facilities management. And so for me, if I had a magic wand, I would love to have a large pool of experienced candidates available to come on board. Because again, for me, because I'm more outwardly focused, I'm not doing the work, I'm out there selling jobs. If I'm having a conversation with a customer, I need to know that we've got good quality people to back it up. Now, we always are balancing that, but we have to create our assessors, oftentimes not from scratch, but from other areas. But yeah, if my magic wand would be directly focused on, I would love to have 10 qualified candidates for every opening.
The dream situation, right? Yeah, no, great choice of a magic wand, I must say. Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your insights. It's been really interesting and a great conversation. For anyone who's listening or watching today and they wanted to reach out to you, where would they go? What would they need to do?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, Bill Roth, R-O-T as in Thomas, H as in Harry. Email is bill.roth@rothiams.com, so IAMS.com. And I really appreciate Said for the opportunity. I love these conferences. I'm a total business nerd, so I love to nerd out on my business and other businesses. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And yeah, feel free. RothIAMS.com as well is our website, and you can get at me. You can get at me through there as well.
Awesome. Well, Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure, as I mentioned, and have a great rest of the day.
Absolutely. Thanks very much. And I hope for your listeners, this provided some value to their day.
Awesome. Cheers.